That out here. Hello and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. I am Rob Howe, your host, joined as always by Scott Docterman from The Athletic. Trying to mute my YouTube feed there because it's giving me cross volume in my headset, and I'm not prepared for that this morning. How are you, Scott?
Great. It's I guess it's summer now, right? I mean, it feels like it's summer, and we're going to get humidity, so we're back in Iowa in the summer, but otherwise couldn't complain. I'm on a 3-day weekend. That doesn't happen very often, so I'll take it.
Yes, happy Juneteenth to everybody. It is Monday, June 19th, 2023, celebrating freedom, and that's a good thing. Equality, all those good things being celebrated today. So recognize, check it out. Not a ton going on like live action right now, so it's more getting ready for the season and some recruiting news and things like that. But there are always things to talk about here on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. I was in Minneapolis last week at my daughter's national volleyball tournament, and Scott and I were trying to get something together, but hotel Wi-Fi was awful and my schedule was kind of erratic. So apologize to folks for us not having one last week. But as a result, we will record today, and then we will record again on Thursday. And on Thursday's podcast, we'll preview the big recruiting weekend coming up with the official visits this coming weekend. And then we'll also talk about, I think, the NBA draft.
Yeah, that's right.
And then also we have interviews with football players on Wednesday. So plenty going on this week that we'll get to in Thursday's podcast. But today, we'll talk a little of some things that happened last week, some articles that Scott has posted on The Athletic. So kind of be a potpourri here today, but hopefully it'll be entertaining and informative, and we'll do the best we can here. I'm still kind of recovering from that experience. Was cool. I'll brag on my kid a little bit here, our 12-year-old. We finished 25th in the country for 12-year-olds at the Nationals, which is it's pretty nice if you're thinking about it from like a college football standpoint. Finishing the season in the top 25 is pretty nice. And they it was one of those things where the first day 2-1, then lost 2 tough matches on Thursday, came back and won all their matches Friday and Saturday to get kind of wrestle back to 25th place. So proud of the kids. It's amazing at that level that I competed, Scott, at varsity sports and all that stuff, but our youngest is definitely on a trajectory ahead of anything I've done athletically. I never played in like a national tournament like that, so pretty proud of her.
Yeah, we didn't have those too much when we were growing up, other than like the Little League World Series or something. But no, that's awesome, Rob. I mean, for a team representing Iowa in this part of Iowa to be able to go up and finish in the top 25 nationally is a great thing. And it shows great promise for, City High mostly, or is it most kind of the area?
That's kind of cool. It's mixed. We got kids from Tipton, North Cedar, Liberty, West, City High, Wapello. I mean, it's all 319 area code. And the coolest thing about it is, and I apologize to people who have to listen to this, and we're coming in for Hawkeye news, but it's the off season, so we have time. But we played teams from LA, San Diego, Salt Lake City. I mean, big cities. Orlando, things like that. So I think if you look at it, just compared us to some other programs up there, we're from one area code in Iowa, and we're playing against teams that are from, big cities. So it was cool. And shout out to the Iowa Rockets volleyball program. They do a really good job. They've been around for 25 years now in the Iowa City area, and if you think about some of the best players that have come through Iowa, They probably come through that program. There are a lot of other really good programs in Iowa too. It almost, to segue, Scott, I have people ask me this too. You guys play at really high level from a club standpoint, from 11, 12, all the way up through 17 and 18-year-old kids. Why isn't the University of Iowa better at volleyball? And that's really the challenge right now, is to keep some of these kids that's in state. I mean, Nebraska's had some top flight kids that are from Iowa. Wisconsin has a really good player from, I think she's from West Des Moines Valley or one of the Waukee. Iowa needs to figure out if it wants to be. I mean, we all know how good the Big Ten is at volleyball, and it's really hard to move up. But keeping the in-state kids in state would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, you look at why can't Iowa volleyball be comparable to Iowa basketball, women's basketball? When you look at the state, and heck, when we were Cubs in this business 25 years ago, I mean, the state tournament was a big deal then, and it's even a bigger deal now. And there's really no reason why Iowa can't have at least some success. You look across the state at Iowa State, you look north to northern Iowa,
yeah.
and then you look around you when you talk about Wisconsin and Nebraska and Minnesota, they're all having success. Iowa has just been, dreadful for the most part for most of its history. And so, yeah, keeping people in state is a big deal. And I think it's possible. It's going to take time. I mean, there's no question, but you get a couple of recruits, they stay, you win some matches, potentially eventually get to the postseason, then you can kind of make incremental progress. It's not going to be easy, but it is a sport that I know the state really celebrates. And it's not like field hockey, Rob, where there's no grassroots organization in the state. And that's not to knock at all Lisa Salucci or the program. It just means that there's just nothing here for that. Whereas with volleyball, it's a big deal, top 25 in the country, went to, at that age, they should be all given free season passes to go watch them compete in Coralville.
Yeah, no doubt. And you're right. I think if you can get one or two of the top in-state kids to go to Iowa and then kind of show other younger kids that look up to them, hey, it's okay to stay in state, I think that would be how you get the ball rolling on that. And hopefully it happens. The top two kids in the 23 class went to Northern Iowa. Kid from Urbandale, kid from Liberty High went to UNI. So that no shame there either. I mean, Bobby Peterson's got a great program up there, so it's not like picking UNI over Iowa for like football.
And that's another one. And I mean, not to it is kind of the horse latitudes, and I guess we can get our volleyball talk in, but that's one where whether it's Gary Barta or whoever the senior women administrator is, should have made Bobby Peterson an offer she couldn't refuse a long time ago. That if you're going to have that kind of success at Northern Iowa and beat Iowa consistently, and then to the point I think Iowa decided to quit playing them, then go up there and make her say absolutely not, that I do not want 3 times the salary, to go 70 miles south. And then you look west, and this year it's going to be incredible. We can knock Nebraska however we want for football, and we will here shortly. But we're also going to praise them for volleyball, because they have a sellout at Memorial Stadium for a volleyball match in August. So it's going to be kind of like the grapple and the gridiron, except for volleyball, and they're going to sell the whole damn thing out. That's unbelievable, and kudos to them for doing that.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, we were just screwing around and talking the other day with some of the kids on my daughter's team, again, 12U, and two of the better players were like, we're going to go to camp in Nebraska this summer. And I was like, are you going to camp at Iowa too? No. So, I mean, you got kids coming from Eastern Iowa going all the way to Lincoln for volleyball camp at the University of Nebraska, where they have a university right here. Yeah. Those are the things that have to change. So, there's your volleyball discussion for probably a long time.
Yeah, I think. But congrats to the Iowa Rockets.
Thank you very much. And the older kids will be in Chicago next month for their national tournament. Some really good kids I've gotten to see working for Prep Dig here in the spring and summer in different tournaments in those older age groups. So some chances here for Iowa volleyball to keep some kids in state, and hopefully that gets done. And we can talk more about volleyball. If Iowa can get really good at volleyball again, maybe we'll have more interest and more people want us to talk about it, and we will do so. But another segue into talking about Nebraska volleyball is talking about Nebraska football, which recently, was it Tom Chattel? Was he the one that wrote this thing that kind of sparked discussion, for lack of a better term? And Scott has basically, the premise of the piece that Tom wrote was that Nebraska now gets away from the trash in the Big Ten West division and can now spread its wings and whatever. But those who may not know, Nebraska has not been very good and has not won the West Division. So that really, I mean, you don't even have to go any farther than that to make your point that that premise is just ridiculous. And then Scott spent the better part of how long battling with these people?
It felt like a year, but it was really about 4 or 5 days, but it was all hours of all days. Even the times where you're just kind of sitting around doing nothing and you check your phone and you're like 15, 20 interactions, and it's all Husker, 1997.com, tweeting at me, we've got 5 championships and you don't. And so let's start with, I mean, the argument switched a lot, which made it more laughable and ridiculous, all told. Let's start with the original premise. It's very possible that what Tom Chattel meant and what he wrote were two different things, because sometimes we say the wrong thing and we're like, oh God, I said it the wrong way. I should have wrote it that way. But that it's better than slumming in the Big Ten West is what he wrote. And that could be construed by 6 teams in the West as they're the slums. And by Nebraska, it could be, well, we're not playing very well in the slums. I look at it as, since 2017, Nebraska is the only program and Power 5 program nationally to have no bowl appearances. You're talking about the program that went 41 years in a row, at one point, that was this upper echelon, wonderful program to the dregs. And then so you're looking at it going, what are you doing to complain about everybody else? I mean, you won 2 games against the Big Ten West the last 2 years, one of which was Iowa, which I was reminded of a few times last week, that they did beat Iowa last year. I know that was I want to talk about Super Bowl stuff. That's, people say that about Iowa State. I'm like, well, maybe Nebraska qualifies a little bit more now, but they're also 5th overall in wins among the Power 5 over that span. I mean, that Kansas is worse, or Arizona, but for them to be in that category tells me that if you're in one of what people consider is the worst division, or one of the worst divisions in the Power 5, what does it say about you that you're the worst team in the worst division? You're the worst program, essentially. Now, there are so many times when we've lobbed them, plaudits and rose petals of their history, but God damn it, that was a long time ago. They haven't won a conference title since 1999. They haven't been in a major bowl since 2001. They've been in one Big Ten championship game since they joined. That was in the old Legends and Leaders in 2012, and they got beat 70-31. So it's time to stop with the past. It's time to stop with, we won 5 championships, because then the conversation did turn that, well, Iowa doesn't have any. And then I mentioned that the Big Ten recognizes 3, and that was worse. That was a stronger argument that they were trying to make, that Iowa doesn't have championships than anything. And I'm like, but the Big Ten recognizes them. But that doesn't mean they have them. Well, that's the Big Ten recognizes them. Well, that's not, that's fake news and all this other stuff. So I'll have to show you. I did save some of the tweets and put it in a piece.
I would periodically hop on the Twitter, and then oftentimes I'd chuckle because I'd see you tuning up a Nebraska fan with actual facts, and then it would just devolve into nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I even sent them the link with the page. I did a screenshot. They thought I was the one who typed it up, and then they were mad because Ohio State was listed in 1970, which was one of the Nebraska years. And and after a while, I mean, I'd kind of there's so many ridiculous things being said. I'd have to respond. I didn't want to. I wanted to kind of fizzle it out. I don't like. And then I'd come back, and people would come back at me. It was just, but it's remarkable what that program is going through.
It's interesting because we wondered back, 10 years ago or so now, more than that, how the Iowa and Nebraska rivalry would evolve, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What would it be like? What would the games be like? What would the discussion be like? And to me, Scott, this is what it's turned into, is Nebraska fans continually trying to act superior to Iowa based on the past, but with an inability to recognize the present and what has happened since they've been in the Big Ten. And what Purdue's played, Purdue, Northwestern, Iowa, Wisconsin have all won the West, right? Have all represented the division.
Yeah.
So 4 out of 7 in the division as it currently stands.
Yeah.
You're one of the 3 that haven't been there. And I know Legends and Leaders was different. That was a different setup. Mm-hmm. But as the current West stands, and celebrating not having to slum with the teams that are in that division, as you said earlier, what does that say about you? You couldn't beat those teams and go to Indianapolis and represent the division.
Exactly. That's the whole point, that you're brought in. Nebraska was brought in to be an important an important piece to the Big Ten in general. And then the Big Ten West, when it got changed from East-West, because in large part, the Wisconsin Iowa rivalry was shelved with Legends and Leaders. You had the Maryland and Rutgers wanted to play Penn State and some of those teams, and then Delaney thought it was interesting to send some of the marquee teams to the East Coast with more regularity, which is why they decided to go with the split of East-West. But Nebraska was supposed to hold its own, and Nebraska has not. It's done the opposite of that, and that's really ridiculous. I mean, when you're looking at since 2000, they've been in one major bowl game, the Rose Bowl in 2001, which they backed into for the championship after getting beat 62-36 by Colorado. They haven't been to a major bowl since 2001. And the whole Nebraska's back, the past, who gives a shit? I tweeted this out that I'm like, there's only one fan base that cares about Iowa's listed championships. It's not Iowa. It's not their oldest rival in Nebraska. It's not their most hated basketball rival in Illinois, or it's not Minnesota, who they played 116 times. It's not their closest Big Ten rival in Wisconsin. It's Nebraska. Why? Because they cannot stand having Iowa over the top of them for any reason whatsoever. And I get it. There's a lot of pride there, and I think this is why this series was protected, because there is a chance that this thing could be really, really, really good, but both teams have to measure up. And Iowa, I think, we can, objectively say Iowa has failed in some ways to be as good as it can be, but there's no question that Nebraska has failed to be, what it should be. And until Nebraska gets there, I mean, I think Iowa fans have kind of not necessarily written off the rivalry, but have just kind of said, well, it's not as big of a deal as the other games, including Illinois or Northwestern or any of the old school Big Ten. So Nebraska's got to win its way back. And last year, beating Iowa, what's funny is that should have been a moment to kind of kick it off. You just caused some major pain. You caused Iowa not to go to Indianapolis. However, most Iowa fans are probably grateful that they weren't going to Indianapolis. They just didn't want to lose to Nebraska to do it.
No question. But, and it is great points. And again, I feel the rivalry has been more about what's said off the field and away from the competition and talking, in historical terms and things like that instead of this rivalry to take a next step. The last game of the season, that Black Friday game, has to mean something for both teams.
Yeah.
And how many times have we had that throughout since they started playing annually? It's just most of the time we get to that game and Iowa's playing for something and Nebraska's trying to get into a bowl game at best.
Right. It's been the bronze medal of the West, or it's been Iowa needing to win. It did in 2015. It did that in 2021. And then last year it lost. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
But it was also, again, I think there were a lot of grateful Iowa fans that they didn't win that game. But it was, again, sucky that they had to lose it to Nebraska is probably the way that they would define it. But when you're looking at a team that's, going through this list here, Rob, the fewest overall wins since 2017, Kansas is 1, Rutgers 2, Vanderbilt, Arizona, then Nebraska, 23 wins since 2017, since they hired Scott Frost, and last year, Mike Riley. When you're talking about league wins, Nebraska's got 16 over that span, which is third worst in the Big Ten behind Rutgers and Maryland, which also says, wow, that's not real good on the whole. And that's actually what I tweeted out first was the fewest league wins of the Big Ten over that span. All were the 3 most recent expansion editions.
And I'm sure Nebraska plays a harder schedule than I.
Oh, yeah. That was the other thing they had to play Ohio State all those times. What about Iowa? Well, here's the thing that the Big Ten set up, which was cross over the highest profile teams for good games over a 6-year period. Wisconsin played Michigan. Iowa played Penn State. Nebraska played Ohio State. Iowa's the only one to beat Ohio State out of that group. Iowa has the best winning, percentage out of that group. Although Wisconsin's 3-3 with Michigan, Iowa is 2-4 with Penn State, and there are almost every game could have gone either way. Nebraska's 0-6 against Ohio State. Iowa's 1-1 against Ohio State over that span, and it's like, well, why are they playing? Well, I'm also like, no team has played Rutgers more often than Nebraska either, except for Illinois, which was the crossover. So you're 5-0 against Rutgers, you're 0-6 against Ohio State, but you're like 15-38 against the West. Come on, man. What's this all about? Why is this becoming such a, so do better. Do better against Iowa, do better against Minnesota, do better against Illinois and Purdue and all these teams that have beaten you a lot lately. And that's to me where this is kind of borderline ridiculous. Yes, they have these trophies and they're magnificent. They were great teams back then, but none of the current players were alive for it. Why does it matter? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I get the sense that, at least from the outside looking in, that they're more cautiously optimistic that Matt Rule can do this. I think a lot of people were burned by Scott Frost. They were all in. They were like, this is the guy, favorite son coming home. Because I remember when he was hired, Frost warning and everybody look out, Ohio State, Michigan, everybody's in trouble because Scott Frost is back, and that failed miserably. And I think and I'm not saying I was involved, on that train, but I thought Scott Frost would work. I thought it was a good hire.
For sure.
I never saw it being a disaster that it was. I like Matt Rule, and I think it has a chance to work. But it's hard, man. It's hard in this league to establish yourself. And we saw that Wisconsin, you think about how good Wisconsin's been, and they fired their coach last year because they felt like they were falling off from, the standard that Barry Alvarez set. And,
and they have.
And they have. And now Nebraska's trying to they need to stop thinking about getting back to the early 90s and just get back to where Pelini had you.
Yeah.
You know, winning 9-10. You got to get there first before you start thinking about winning national championships and divisions and Big Ten titles.
Right. It's crazy that it's become this, but you know, when you looked over at the Scott Frost era, first of all, I was all in on him too, going, okay, finally, you know, they made the move like Michigan did with Harbaugh, with, not that I would say Saban to Alabama, but damn, it's a good move. You could see it. It should work. Favorite son, prodigal son, whatever, comes back home, leads him to great things. And for it to fail as miserably as it did, and to lose in the fashion that it did, and the culture just was abysmal, and the whatever, all the attrition and what have you, that it was just ridiculous to watch. And it just never got back. I mean, and then there was that one year where they were the greatest 3-win team in college football history or something.
So many close losses.
Yeah. And they had like all their losses were by single digits. And that was like, hey, we're close. Well, that's where most teams are. You just got to get over the top. Right. And so, and they couldn't find a way. And then they beat Iowa last year. They beat Iowa. I'm not gonna give them I'm not gonna give any excuses for Iowa. I don't really care, but I do look at it that they were fortunate when Cooper DeJean got knocked out and Spencer Petras lost his arm and shoulder and every other body part, and they won. And good for them. And they saved Iowa in the Big Ten from a really big embarrassment against Michigan, I think. But they've got to figure out how do you make incremental progress. And the one thing is whether it's the fan base or our friends in the media or whatever over there, is they struggle with taking those steps incrementally, mentally. That it's a process, and maybe we're conditioned so much over here as the developmental program that everybody understands and respects the process. There they don't, where they think that Nebraska's back. Well, okay, let's say they beat Minnesota in week 1 and Colorado in week 2. Is Nebraska back, or is Nebraska just beat 2 average to below average teams? Well, the message will be Nebraska's back and Matt Rule's great, all that. That's what it was after the first drive last year against Northwestern in Ireland. Then they got beat.
Yeah.
So it's just, but we wasted a lot of time and bandwidth talking about a team that's not real good, and people are going to say that they're living rent free in our heads. But I think it's almost a matter of if they were mediocre, we wouldn't talk about them. That they're a train wreck, and you talk about train wrecks. You don't talk about the trains that arrive on time or 5 minutes late.
And that's, but again, it speaks to the rivalry, right? That we talk about this. That's, I guess it's good. It's good that there is interest and there is some, give and take back and forth between the people on both sides, and there's interest there. So that's good. Now we just need it to be more competitive on the field. And I know Nebraska won last year for the first time in a long time, since 2014, right? Yeah. So if it's a little bit more even on the field, I think that will add to the rivalry. And hopefully at the end of the season, both teams are playing for something, and then that stokes the rivalry too. Because if you win that game and it means something, that fuels and stokes it. So hopefully we get to that point.
Yeah. Well, if you would have told me, Rob, in 2011, when it officially became Black Friday game, and they would play on Black Friday every year, that not once would it be a winner take all game, I would have been shocked.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised it hasn't been that. I figured at least once or twice, for the West Division title, it would have been a winner take all. And it hasn't gotten to that point, and largely because of Nebraska. It's had 6 straight losing seasons, 7 out of the last 8. I mean, it's lost Iowa, 7 out of the last 8 times, to Wisconsin 9 straight, all that kind of thing. So
my advice to Matt Rule, not that he would care or take it, would be start in the trenches, man. Toughen things up, get better on the lines, start there, and then move back. because it seemed like Scott Frost was bells and whistles and never really developed his line play. And if you're not playing well up front on both sides of the ball in this league, you're going to get your ass handed to you.
Oh, for sure. And that's every time, in the past, I probably end up on more Nebraska radio stations in the off season or even during the season than I do anybody but Iowa ones. And, because they like football. I mean, it's a passionate fan base. I'm not going to,
no question.
They get into it. And I think that's what will make this series sizzle and probably be the biggest game. And I thought by now it would be for both teams in the season, because there's a different mix between Iowa and Nebraska. You don't get this kind of back and forth with Iowa, Wisconsin, or Minnesota.
Yeah,
you do to an extent with Iowa State, and it but it's different. This is competitive, and this is two programs of kind of similar values and expectations. But everything I've always told those people is, look, you've got you've got to be as tough and physical up front as Iowa and Wisconsin. You don't have to aspire to be Iowa or Wisconsin, but you've got to match them in physicality and toughness. If you do that, then no matter what you want to do on offense, that's fine. If you want to run the spread, if you want to run the triple option, it doesn't matter. But if you cannot be as physical as either team, and Iowa run and hit with its offensive line and the way it's two gap physicality on defense, and then Wisconsin with its power O and 3-4 alignment. If you can't match that, then you're going to really struggle. You're going to have to really overcome it with a lot of finesse, and that doesn't work week in and week out. And then when you look on at Minnesota and Illinois in particular, who have adopted those styles and been real comparable and not nearly as successful, at least at Minnesota, you're talking about being down in the physicality department, like 4 of your league opponents, and then you have one of the best coaches in the game in Pat Fitzgerald, who does it a different, who hasn't been good the last couple of years, but has been good in the past. It's going to be hard. So Scott Frost thought he was smarter than everybody else and acted like it. Matt Rule, I think, has a little bit more ground and pound to him. And, he wasn't successful when it came to NFL. He was in college. So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, no doubt. It'll be interesting to see, and they get one more shot at the West, and we'll see how that turns out this year. Let's take a break here, Scott. This is a good time to take a little break for our supporters, our advertisers, and one of them is Systems Unlimited, and support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited. We're going to hear from a few more of our sponsors right now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side to actually talk about more Iowa things and not Nebraska. We're back on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Thank you to our sponsors. We really appreciate their support. Allows us to bring you this content free of charge. And you can get a fresh Hawkeye-centric podcast on the feed just about every day of the week, Monday through Friday, that is. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the flagship podcast with Pat Hardy and the guys from KCJJ. I do the mailbag on Tuesdays. Scott and I are usually here on Thursdays. You're not off with this is a Monday. I get sometimes we have to adjust in the summer with family things and what have you. So appreciate everybody adjusting with us. And if you're looking for Hawkeye podcast, the Hawk Fanatic feed is there for your pleasure. And Scott, you've written some things while I was away, and just getting a chance this morning to kind of catch up on some of those. You have a couple pieces here on newcomers, defensive newcomers, offensive newcomers coming in. Which would you like to start with? We'll do kind of an overview of this, but I really encourage people, subscribe to The Athletic. You get in-depth coverage of Iowa, really great pieces like this from Scott. We can only kind of touch on the surface of them here on the podcast, or we'd be here for hours more. That. So we kind of give you an idea of what Scott has, and you can go over the site and dig a lot deeper in. So Scott, the floor is yours. Where are we starting?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And right now we have a new deal for the summer for $1 a month for 12 months. So hopefully people can take advantage of that.
And I will say, you guys it sucks, and we see this happening not just at the athletic, but all across our industry. People are losing jobs.
Yeah.
I'm not getting up on my soapbox here. I'm not going to take a ton of time, but if you enjoy really good writing, really good coverage, support The Athletic, support your local journalists. We saw what happened in the Quad Cities with the building collapse and how well that was covered by local journalists. I know media gets shit on a lot, but you don't want to be without it. Put it that way. Think about it a little bit. Get away from the rhetoric and the narratives and realize that it's an important part of our lives. And that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I could not agree more that if you're in Cedar Rapids, go with the Gazette. If you're throughout the state, register Quad City Times. I mean,
and it's also reasonable. You could get all of those and still be, and it'd be worth your while. You would get value.
Exactly. So, but specific for us, I cover Iowa, some other stuff. We have, I don't know, neighborhood of 30 college football writers around the country, 6 covering Big Ten programs. And then, hey, if you're a Bears fan, Cubs fans, Jet fan, Mets fan, a lot of different teams are covered. So you can
fantasy sports, you guys do a great job.
Yep.
NASCAR, golf.
Right. Formula One, we just hit on UFC. And then, gambling, which I would say if you're not a student athlete, that's probably all right.
Or in the NFL these days.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. And it's like, guys, stick to the dice games.
Yes.
Yeah. But with this topic, in our mailbags, you have one too. And this one was, if I had to pick one breakout athlete on offense and defense, who would I pick? And on offense, it's interesting because I could probably pick just about everybody depending on your criteria.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, how many of them are actually settled players? And none of them are. All of them could elevate. But
what's the definition of a breakout? I think everybody has kind of a different definition of that too. So
and like I said, with offense, it's not like you're returning like 3 guys who got all Big Ten awards last year. So I decided,
even if you look at like Caleb Johnson and Luke Lachey, good seasons, but I wouldn't call either one of them household names.
Well, exactly. Mason Richmond is the most experienced lineman. He was honorable mention last year, but is that, he could be this too. But I decided to go with Connor Colby. And I thought that among the players returning who kind of played, but have that potential to go from a guy to, wow, okay, pretty good. I think Connor may fit that better than anybody else because, he started more games as a true freshman than any player in Iowa history at 11, 2 years ago as a guard. They flipped him outside. They thought he'd be a good tackle. It really was not the best move.
What did Worth start? I know you write on this, but I just was curious. How many did he start?
I think it was nine, 8 or 9. Yeah. He didn't start starting games until Ike Bucker got tore his Achilles and stuff. But Colby started 11. And, including a Big Ten championship game, moved out to right tackle. It wasn't the right move for him. It clearly wasn't. Moved back inside. And I thought by the end of the year, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see some of this, why he was a 4-star, why he was a guy that committed to Iowa as going into his junior year. And we're starting to see him grow. And I think he's got the chance to really take that next step. And, and I could say that about several players, as you said, maybe Caleb Johnson's a guy who could be a breakout performer in the Big Ten. Maybe a wide receiver could be in that, I would say Luke Lachey, Mason Richmond, is Cade McNamara count? Probably not, but, but then I said my number 2 was Logan Jones.
He'd probably be my first, but I'm right with you. We're on the same thought process here. I think a lot depends on those two, right? Mm-hmm. I think Mason Richmond has been more consistent than those two, but if those two if Mason Richmond can take another step forward, and those two guys take another step forward, then a lot of the ills that we've seen on the offensive line the last 2 years will be corrected.
Exactly. I was talking to Kirk Ferentz about a month ago or so on the iClub trip, and I wrote about it then that, like, when I look at this offensive line, I see 2007 to 2008. And for those of you who follow the program know exactly what I'm talking about, that they were just absolutely dreadful. I think like 46 sacks in 07.
Yeah.
Young players, Brian Bublaga playing as a true freshman. Julian Vandervelde wasn't very good that year. I mean, guys all over the place. By 2008, in the late part of 2008, they're pretty damn good. And then you start to see, okay, there are like 4 NFL draft picks on this offensive line. And if we're talking about very young players, that are going to be juniors now. Mason Richmond, who had a knee operation, but needed to happen and seems to be better. Connor Colby, Logan Jones. If you get that trio going and pointing in the right direction and playing well, and you would hope that Rusty, by the way, who has the greatest picture I've ever seen
that thing kicks ass.
He looks like a Viking, He just needs horns, like. But if he comes in and steps in right away, and then you just, maybe it's maybe you got a newcomer, at tackle like Parker, or maybe it's maybe it's Nick DeYoung. I don't know. I guess that's why they battle and they compete. But if you get just decent production, then you're like, okay, that offensive line looks better. They can run the football. They got a quarterback who's accurate. Okay, got 2 pretty good tight ends who are NFL caliber players. All right, this offense, you can get rid of that 25 point per game BS. This is going to be a pretty good team. So, but I do think it starts with offensive line, and that's why I went with Colby. But I think Logan Jones is second. He's got to get the snap down. I think he's going to be better at that. It's unacceptable if that happens this year, no question. It was really last year, but I do think he looks the part, fits the role, and I think he's got a chance to be a really good player too.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big Logan Jones fan, and just trying to keep reminding myself that he moved over there late and then kind of got thrown into the fire and learned on the job last season. And I think he has the aptitude to take that next step forward and settle in. It wasn't the same as I think people, and I'm guilty of this too, because I wrote about it. People wanted that Tyler Linderbaum story where it just immediately, that's free. He's a freak.
Yeah.
So comparing somebody to Tyler Linderbaum is crazy, but I think Logan Jones is going to be a good player in his own right. And I think that starts this season with the consistency. And I'm with you. They've got guys on that right side. It's just a matter of figuring out where is it Nick DeYoung at guard and Parker at tackle? Is it Feth at guard and one of the other two at tackle? Do they rotate at right tackle, Parker and DeYoung? Because I wouldn't write off Nick DeYoung. I know he's struggled with consistency, but he's one of those, and Scott likes to talk about this, those late senior stories, a guy that emerges. We were hoping that would be Jack Plum last year. It didn't happen for him, but that's not to say it won't happen for Nick DeYoung.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's usually been the hallmark of success for Iowa, is when they have that 5th year guy who it just takes, maybe they're not a great athlete, maybe they're not an NFL player, but they're a player that steps right in, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, they're playing at a pretty good level. And yes, it could be Nick DeYoung. It could be Nick DeYoung as being your swing guy. And Lord knows, one thing I can predict, and I feel reasonably sure of, is that the same 5 guys will not start every game. that somebody's going to probably get hurt. Somebody's probably going to have an ankle issue. Somebody's probably going to have something that they're going to have to sit out a game or two. Hopefully not more, but you never know. That's what football is all about there. But I think, if I was to gauge it right now, I mean, I'd say Rusty Feth is going to probably be one of your guards. And then it's either going to be Parker or DeYoung at right tackle. And then maybe you look at somebody like Jennings Dunker and Bo Stevens as depth. And wow, they might actually have depth. Maybe Tyler Ellsbury is that guy, just that to me, if they can have 8 solid players on the offensive line and feel pretty good about your starting unit and with a really good swing person, then I think you're talking about a different Iowa team, because if they can handle the line of scrimmage, then that's when, hey, now you got a couple of good running backs that I think have that potential to take the next step. And certainly I think Caleb Johnson can be one of the 5 best running backs in the Big Ten this year, which would be a big deal.
And I wouldn't be surprised to see some type of rotation. Iowa's been able to do that in the past on the offensive line. It's not ideal, but you could pair on that right side like Rusty Feth and Dejon Parker as like your main your starters and the guys that get most of the series, and then bring in like a Bo Stevens and Nick DeYoung to spell them every now and then, or every third series, or however you want to do it. And that's fun, because then you'd have the 2 guys on the right side kind of matched up together. That could work. And
they've done a really good job of that usually up to the last 2 years, where often you see that really young, talented offensive lineman that they know is going to be a good 2 to 3 year starter, playing a lot as either a freshman or a sophomore as a rotational guy. I remember Brandon Sheriff and Austin Blythe were, rotating at guard before they ended up playing tackle or in center. And it was the way it worked. Sean Welsh was the same way. Guys in the past, that's where they got their feet wet, is like get in every third series, play guard, rotate in with a veteran. And it helps somebody like Rusty Feth, who's, he's a veteran, no question, but he's also a newcomer to Iowa, and it might take time for him to kind of catch up. And when you're talking about Utah State and Western Michigan, 2 out of the first 3 opponents, you're going to want to get somebody in, because at some point somebody's going to have to go down. Somebody's going to go down. Yeah. So if you can make sure that, hey, Bo Stevens, you're ready to go. Jennings Dunker, you're ready to go. Nick DeYoung, can you start, or can you be the swing guy? Maybe he's the 6th guy, no matter what position we're talking about. Yeah. Guard or tackle. Maybe he's automatically one in, So I think that's a really good thing for Iowa right now, that it does look like they're taking steps forward in that area.
And Dejon Parker's still pretty raw. I mean, he's a guy that they're going to have to tune up from a technical standpoint, and we'll see, how he starts. I think he's the type of guy that's going to be much better in October and November than he probably is in September.
Right. And I'd have to check. I mean, does he have an extra year?
I think he's got 2. Okay. But I could be off on that.
And maybe he's the guy that, because he missed all of spring, which is just a killer.
That sucked.
For any of the players to have him
having him and Seth Anderson both miss spring was just a kick in the nuts.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and maybe it is more Nick DeYoung starting, and then him coming in every third series, and then maybe it flip flops, and then he's got an extra year, which would not be a problem either. So defensively, and then there's some that also, I think, in this regard too. There were 2 that kind of stood out for me as well, but I'm going to start off with Deontay Craig. And, last year he was kind of under the radar, is fair, because not only did he led the team with 6.5 sacks and was 2nd in tackles for loss, but he also did it in 150 fewer snaps than Lucas Van Ness, Joe Evans, John Wagner. And he was an impactful player. He made a lot of big plays. Had a blocked punt. If I was to compare him, because we always do this because it's Iowa and they have the same system for the last 25 years, I look at him as potentially an Adrian Claiborne type. He's kind of similar build, and he's taken those steps in that direction, and he's going to start this year. He's going to get a lot more snaps, and I think he's got the potential to become a guy who might be able to have breakout. And then the other guy I thought that kind of qualifies, because I don't think Cooper DeJean does.
No.
No, he's no breakout, but is Xavier Wampa. And I think
Yeah.
Xavier is going to be a difference maker.
Yeah, I'm with you on those two. I think you could have, those are 1A and 1B, I think, on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully there's a really good story at linebacker too. Maybe, Nick Jackson comes in here, and again, he's like McNamara. He's already done it somewhere else, so it's really tough to pull them as a breakout, but they need him to be good.
Yeah, I think that's, if there is one area where you're concerned about this team, to me, it's linebacker, because not only, because nobody really has done it at Iowa. Jay Higgins played a lot last year, but is he Anthony Hitchens or is he Quentin Alston? And no offense to anybody, but Quentin was a good player, but not all Big Ten guy. And, when you're replacing Seth Benson and you're replacing Jack Campbell, two elite players at the Big Ten level, can Jay be that level? Can he be Seth Benson? And I don't know, but I think he'll be a good player. And then Nick Jackson's done it at a high level in a pretty good conference. Can he make that transition to Iowa? Probably, but then what about depth? What about what if somebody has to go out for a play, a series, a game, 3 games? Who's there, to do that? That to me is probably the scariest part. I mean, Jaden Harrell, Carson Shire, Kyler Fisher,
I think the one thing that makes me feel a little bit better there, Scott, is how much will they play Cash, and having Sebastian Castro at Cash. I'm pretty confident in him. He could be the breakout guy.
Yeah, he could. Absolutely. And you might as well, when you start to look at their schedule and who's got, because when you start to wonder about 4-3 and when they're going to play it, it's usually when they're going to have 2 tight ends, or they're going to have.
Do they play it against Wisconsin now?
They might not have to, and we won't know that for 6 weeks.
No.
Minnesota would be the one that you'd really kind of go, okay, they're probably going to have to, but then again, I don't know. That's like week 7 or whatever, and so you're going.
Is Castro the most physical that they've had at Cash? I think so. You think about Hooker and Belton. Those
good players, no question.
Yeah. NFL guys.
Yeah. Probably better coverage guys, at least what I've seen.
Yeah, I think so too. Castro seems more of when you talk about the hybrid, he's more like linebacker or strong safety.
Yeah. He's like Bob Sanders, strong safety. He's gonna rip your head off.
He's looking to do some damage while he's out there.
Yeah. So I like that position for him. Kentucky tested him, and he was pretty good at it. And then you just look around and you're going, okay, he's. I think he could be a guy maybe you still keep on the field, and then it's like, then you don't have to make that switch. It's kind of the opposite of what happened 20 years ago when they didn't want to deviate from 4-3 because they didn't want to take their best players off the field. Now it could be in reverse.
Or Mike Klinkenborg in coverage at Iowa State.
Yeah, I know.
That was not
on Phillip Bates, a 4-3 quarterback who played wide receiver at that point. And Iowa didn't even sub out its 240-pound linebacker who was a killer in between the tackles. But, that's, and then I think 2010, probably the vivid one for me was Troy Johnson, bless his heart, trying to cover Dane Sanzenbacher, who was the Big Ten receiver of the year. And, and that's what cost him against Ohio State. So, it won them more games than it lost them, but there are times when teams are in hurry up that keeping 4-3 didn't make any sense whatsoever.
Much more versatility and flexibility on defense. I think that's allowed Iowa's defense to evolve and remain among the best in the country. The ability to be flexible and evolve.
They're better now than they were before. And, now maybe 20 years ago, you got some arguments in 04 and
04 was that for the time and what they were playing against what they were playing, the opposition was different then and what offenses were doing, man, that was good.
But when you're looking at last year, they're allowing 3.99 yards per play, which was the best in the Big Ten since 2007. And you're looking at who they played against: Michigan, Ohio State, highly explosive teams.
Yep.
and they're still, they if it wasn't for 6,000 turnovers at Ohio State, maybe they only lose, 31-10 or something, but even so, yeah, I wonder about, if I, and this is off on a different area, but I look at this defense and I think the front wall is going to be really good. And that's really where you need to be.
Yeah.
I think they've got enough depth there that if they have a loss of somebody for several games,
especially a defensive tackle,
yeah,
I mean, you can go 3 deep and be really good.
Right.
Going back to the earlier conversation, I'm sure Nebraska would like to have, Ontario Thompson or,
Jeremiah Pittman.
Yeah, Pittman. Yeah. Some, those guys behind some of the guys that have established themselves already.
Yeah. And I mean, if they have to lose somebody for a significant period of time, whether it's injury or something else related, then they've got enough depth where, YA Black, this is your time to shine. Aaron Graves. Come on down. And to the
somebody
point
might get Wally pipped.
Yeah, I think you're right. When it comes to him, or people are going to look at him and go, what is it about this team that they cannot start the best player because they're younger? Sad but true. But it's to me the second and third level, it's about depth. Do they have somebody, if they have an injury, if they have somebody who can't play for whatever reason?
And I'm starting to get a little bit, I would say worried, but just kind of intrigued and interested in what happens in that other cornerback spot.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was locked into it being Jamari Harris, but coming out of the spring, seemed like we were getting kind of mixed messages on that and how he's come back from the injury, which he was off. I mean, that's a lot of time to miss. So I want to see if the spring was just him getting reacclimated and then he hits the ground running this summer, or if it was him not being what he was before the injury. Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, you're right. Absolutely. And I think that's really a key point, because if he has to, if he's not as good, I mean, that's why they were looking actively at cornerback. They never found, they never got one. And I think that I brought it up, and maybe it's in my mailbag tomorrow or something, but that Iowa was in a really weird position at cornerback after the spring, because what are you telling the prospects? You can come in and compete. That's not exactly what they want to hear. They want to say they want to come in and start. And, because if Jamari Harris is playing the way he did at the end of the 2021 season, he's going to start.
It's his job. Yeah.
He's an NFL guy. He's got great long arms. He's thick frame, can reroute, can intercept, can do all of, he had 4 interceptions, as a part-time starter, basically. So you're bringing in somebody who's wants to prove himself at a great, at a high level and can't.
Yeah.
But then you also, what if he isn't as good as he is, or he can't play for whatever reason? And then it's next thing you know, it's, all right, who do you got? Is it TJ Hall? Is it Deshaun Lee? Are you looking at somebody coming in, John Nestor or Khalil Tate, and one thing about this team is, Rob, is Phil Parker has no qualms with playing a young player at that position, but you have to prove yourself. And, it doesn't look like it'll be, Tegan Davis after his injury this spring. And I think he'll probably redshirt, but I think, any of those players, they got a chance, but then you start to look and go, how do they absorb any other injuries or situations? Can they go 7 or 8 deep? Last year, the Nebraska game cost them, when Cooper DeJean went out, and, TJ Hall, who I still think will have a really good career, but he wasn't ready for that smoke, not for Trey Palmer, the fastest player in the Big Ten. So they need somebody else there.
Yeah, I guess if you're looking to, on the positive side, they usually find somebody when there is some maybe uncertainty at positions on defense. They seem to find a way to figure it out, especially when you have the all off season.
Yeah, and you have that guy, Phil Parker.
Yep. And you've got lockdown on the other side.
Yeah, you've got maybe the most talented do I want to go on this limb or not? The most talented defensive back since Bob Sanders.
Yeah, that's a mouthful. I'd have to go through and think about the other guys. But yeah, I mean, he's in the discussion for me without question. And I think Wonka maybe takes that step forward this year to get where Cooper was last year. I think he's on that same path.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, just looking at his frame, his size, the weight, how fluid he is, playing that position, back line. There's so much to like there. And Quinn Schulte, immediately everybody's saying, why is he playing and not, Xavier, not whoever. We figured out pretty quickly why that was the case. He's pretty damn good, and there's a lot of comparisons. And when Phil brings up Brett Greenwood, because Brett's kind of on this pedestal of those, and he says that's who he kind of reminds me of, when he brings it up, you're like, okay, I got it. Because I can see it. He's the quarterback of the secondary, and he hits like a linebacker. So
reminds me a little bit of Considine too.
Yeah, exactly.
Same path though.
Yeah.
Walk on to, free safety. And it's kind of one of those positions, if you don't really notice them, they're doing their job. It's kind of like an umpire or a referee. If you don't notice what's going on, because they have so much on their plate and they have so much to organize from that back end forward that if the defense is playing well, that free safety has a big role in it.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you throw him, Wampa, Castro, DeJean, you've got 4 really high level players. And then the fifth is if Jamari Harris, can, play to the level that we saw him, 2 years ago. Yeah, their secondary is in a really good spot. It's just a matter of filling in the gaps behind him. One player I really want to see, I think he's a really good athlete that has moved around is Devin Hilson. Can he find a home? He was playing corner in the spring. Can he find a home somewhere and take that step? What about Cohen Entringer? Is he, to me, I think he's probably, ideally, I'd like to see him be the third safety. I'd like to see him being behind, Schulte, and then maybe next year being the starter. And then Deshaun Lee got a lot of really good reps in the spring. And of course, TJ Hall did as well. So, as I said, I think John Nestor's got a chance. I think he might be the one that you look at of the freshman and go, okay, this guy's going to play on every special team. And
I go back and forth between him and Khalil Tate because I like both of those Chicago kids quite a bit. They're both White Sox fans. Is that okay with you?
That's fine. I don't. I'm an old school Cub guy where it's the team of the South that I'm not a Sox don't worry about it.
I think on our podcast, Nestor kind of took a shot at the Cubs too, if I remember correctly. Go back and check that out on the feed.
They deserve it. They deserve everything they get, and I'm not going to complain about that. I think I was reading.
It's another lost summer for the Cubs and the Mets.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I thought the Mets would be better too.
Yeah, me too.
But I looked. It was Jason Stark did a kind of a breakdown of the Hall of Fame chances for all these current players and stuff. And when I saw there were 0 Cubs from the 16 team on that, no Chris Bryant, no Anthony Rizzo, no Javi Baez, I'm going, well, I guess it's a miracle we actually won that, or the Cubs actually won that in 16. And it's a shame because I thought Chris Bryant was a guy that had that kind of potential, and instead he's floundered, injuries and average play. So anyway,
it's interesting. The Mets won it in 86. Cubs won it in 16. Both of those franchises thought, okay, we can go on a run here. Neither team did, and then they ended up, dismantling the teams and went in the shitter.
The Cubs went 3 straight years to the championship. They lost to the Mets in 15, won in 16, and then 17 went to game 7, lost. 18, they lost a 1-game playoff to win the division, and then lost a 1-game wild card. And then 19 they missed, and 20 this is the COVID year that they got in, and they got thrashed right away. They couldn't have scored a run if they had bases loaded, nobody out.
Yeah, '88, the Mets had a really good
Yes.
team, and then freaking Oral Hershiser's has the season of all seasons and pretty much single-handedly helped them win the NL. So that is your baseball discussion for today. Happy summer to everybody.
Yeah.
Let's stick with football here since we're on it. This past weekend, Scott, some highly regarded class of 2025 kids. Those are kids going into their junior year. Visited some nice prospects that I was interested in. Thomas Meyer, in-state tight end with an offer. Some other guys, you can check all that stuff out on the feeds. I don't have the list in front of me. I apologize. I was out of town. But that leads us to the discussion of Iowa offering an in-state quarterback in the 2025 class, Alex Mansky from Algona. I've done a lot on him for Prep Red Zone. He was one of my favorite guys in the fall when I was looking at film, Scott. I've watched his highlights a ton. Kid has a cannon, very good athlete, moves well. I think he was their leading rebounder, second leading scorer in basketball, so very good athlete. It's a Jack. They also have a defensive lineman in the 25 class, Jack Limbaugh, who's visited here a couple times. Does not have an Iowa offer yet, but has been offered by, I believe, Kansas State, Nebraska, and maybe Iowa State. Those three. I think he's got 3 Power Fives already. So I'm going to doing it up. Going in the 25 class. But I like this kid. He also has offers from Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Pitt, I believe, Alex Mansky. So grew up an Iowa State fan, camped at Iowa State last week, I believe, and the Cyclones have not offered. So this will be fascinating recruitment to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun when you have the in-state quarterbacks who end up with offers and one of the in-state schools don't offer him. I think that's JJ Cole. Iowa offered him, but he was a backup offer.
And they kind of, with the connections to Iowa State, they knew they were fighting an uphill battle there.
Right. But, they were really all in on, on the guy coming in now, gosh darn it. Marco Lanus.
Marco Polo.
Yeah.
He probably had to deal with that shit.
I'm sure he does now. They probably call him Polo or something, or they'll give him a Christmas present. Do they still even have Polo cologne? I don't know. But Mansky, that's an interesting location, north of Fort Dodge, kind of north central Iowa, and it's not really known for a lot of players. Humboldt, which is between Fort Dodge and Algona, has had a few, but not so much Algona. So I'm really interested to see how this materializes. And if Iowa State hasn't offered him now, it looks like Iowa State, they're usually one of the first ones to offer out of the chute. They're either very, very careful or they've got their eyes on somebody else. And
I think Pitt was the first to offer him.
Yeah. And I know Nebraska's been interested, and then of course Iowa. So this will be fascinating to see how this one comes together. But there's some really good players within the state that were at the tailgater or whatever this weekend. And I think when you look at not only Jack Limbaugh, who they probably should offer him, if nothing else.
I like him a lot.
Yeah.
I do. I like him a lot. But again, they understand it's an uphill battle. His mom was a star volleyball player at Nebraska, and his dad played football in Nebraska. So it's going to make it tough, but you got to be in it to win it, right?
Right. Well, you can't concede anybody who's in your own borders until they tell you no. If they say we're interested and they came to the tailgater, then there's a chance. Then there's an opportunity there. And, and then I think they feel pretty good about a tight end from West High named Mason Woods.
I'm still not convinced tight end at his position, but they know better than me.
Yeah. Right.
I like him at safety myself.
Really?
And I know somebody who likes him at linebacker who coaches him.
Yeah.
So who knows? He's only halfway through his high school career. So let's see how these guys develop physically.
Yeah, if he looks like his dad, I'll probably say he could be like a tight end or defensive end. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Or outside linebacker. Nick Brooks from Kennedy, from Georgia, moving to Kennedy. I think you put a full court press on him. You take him to class, you hold his books, you ask him if he needs any help with, getting a ride home from school, NIL deal at Kennedy High School.
He's the next Tristan Wirfs,
Caden Proctor. Yeah.
in-state offensive lineman. That's going to probably be a national type recruit that, again, you have to fight off. This school's coming from out of state.
Right. And the fact that it's in your market.
Yes.
Cedar Rapids is different than Des Moines. I mean, you've got to be there every day. You've got to, well, not every day, but you got to be there so often that you want to make sure that don't leave. We've got you. We're going to bring you to the next level.
Season tickets at Kingston.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Somebody should be there every day. But, Thomas Meyer from Clear Lake, hey.
I interviewed him this morning. I'll have a story on him later today. I like him a lot too.
Yeah. He's he's got a pretty good coach there, knows football, played for a long time. All-Americans should be in the College Football Hall of Fame. By the way, nobody has more tackles for loss in the history of college football than Jerry DeVries. So it should put him in the Hall of Fame for that.
His last year here was my first year here, 97. I think that was his last.
98.
Was 98 his last year?
Yeah.
Okay, so I covered him for 2 years then.
Yeah,
that was a player, man. He was a monster.
Yeah, just sucked for him. He was on a 3-win team his senior year.
Yeah,
he came back, and it was a big deal when he came back because he probably would have been a first rounder the year before. But then another guy that his brother is walking on and has a chance to probably be a depth chart guy, and that's Joey Van Wetzinga, for a defensive lineman. I mean, Rusty was a guy that was got FCS offers, but Joey's a guy that's going to get major offers, and so I
really good in-state class.
Yeah, I think it's a stronger class than the 24 one,
and that's a good class.
Yeah. So
the thing with the 25 is there are guys at different spots, different positions. Yeah. Whereas 24, all the guys in the 24 class look the same.
Yeah,
right. It's just really great athletes that could play tight end or linebacker, or, grow into defensive ends or whatever. But I like the 24 class as well. But you're right. Iowa needs to follow the success it had in the 24 class in state with a nice haul in 25.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the incoming one, it's like, how many 6'2", 205-pound players can you fit on one roster? And and it's like, okay, who do you, and then if you're Ray Braithwaite, you're like, okay, do we bulk this one to 240 or this one to 240? And do we make this one 205 still? So you're like Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, trying to figure that out. Preston Reese, you're this way. Cam Buffington, you're this way. Weiskopf, yes, you are probably the more biggest of the athletes. You be what you can be, and then we'll play off you.
Yeah, I think that's a fun class. This class coming in. And the next class that will be seniors this year, and then 25's a strong class in state as well. And we'll see what happens with Alex Mansky. You always, when I do these stories and interview these kids, I try to get some tells, so to speak, to use poker terms. He's a pretty good poker player. I don't think he's in a rush to make a decision. And that's the thing too, with quarterbacks. They're often one of the first, if not the first commitment in a given class.
Yeah.
Because there just aren't a lot of spots for them. They want to secure their spot wherever they're going to go. So he certainly could end up making a decision not too far into the distant future, but he's also somebody who's kind of just taken off recently. So I think he wants to get to know all the programs involved with him a little bit better, which makes a lot of sense and what you want to do, especially with the day and age of the transfer portal, where you pick a school that you think's for you and it's not, and then you have to go in there, and then that's what happens, and your life is thrown into anarchy.
Yeah, I think, probably for a quarterback like him, take the fall, go make some game day visits, see how your season's going, discover if there are any other programs that have interest in what you can do, and then go from there. So I think overall, if he can make it his decision by December, that's probably a good thing for him. Maybe maybe November, just something like that, perhaps. And I can't speak to how good Algona is going to be. I don't know, what are they 3A or 4A? I mean, since the class is split,
I think they're still 3, but don't quote me on that.
The class split now that they're,
there's a 5A in football. Yeah, it screwed everything up.
So I'm trying to figure out some of these tweener schools, but even so, I mean, maybe he makes the playoffs, or maybe he gets to early November and his team's done, and then it's like, well, I could take, visits, official visits in November.
I will tell you this, and this I'm not calling anybody in particular on the carpet. Algona needs to be better on the offensive line. When I'm watching the highlights, one of the things that stands out about Alex is his escapability, and he had to escape a lot. But he throws well on the run. He has a good feel in the pocket from where the pressure's coming from, probably through experience.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Algona was young on the line. I don't want to take any shots at those kids, but he does a nice job of moving the pocket, keeping plays alive with his legs, because he's a good athlete, and he's got a quick release, and he's got a really strong arm. So he's definitely someone that would look good in black and gold. And we'll see if Iowa State changes course and offers him, and how that will affect things, and how things go with Nebraska, Pitt, and Wisconsin as well. And maybe more come in. There's a good chance that happens as well. I think he still has camps this summer at Kansas State. I can certainly see them offering. He fits that system pretty well. And then what other camps?
I'm surprised Minnesota hasn't been involved, because it's not that far away. It's probably just as close, if not closer, than Iowa. But
I'm not sure what they have. Maybe they have an in-state 25 or something. I'm not sure what their quarterback recruiting looks like for 25. But Alex Mansky will be one that's talked about a lot in state here as we move forward into the summer and into his junior season. Transition here to basketball, Scott. This will probably be our last topic for today, unless there's something else that I missed. This was when I was out of town, and I think you have more of a grasp on this. You basically informed me before we started recording that Jack McCaffrey from Iowa City West did a story with 247. Is that the right network? And let it be known that he would not be a Hawkeye. And that's pretty big news on a lot of levels. It makes you wonder why he wouldn't want to play for his father, or is his father not that opens speculation? Because I think the assumption was, Scott, and we shouldn't assume, was that Fran was going to coach Jack at Iowa and then maybe reevaluate at the end of Jack's career, his own career, whether he would keep going. I don't know how long Fran wants to coach. I haven't asked him about that, but this certainly is a curveball, so to speak.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, it is, he doesn't think he's going to go to Iowa. Of course, things can change over time, but when you're talking about, the youngest son of the current head coach, who's coached his two sons, one for 6 years, the other is on year 5. And he's, Jack McCaffrey is considered the number 51 prospect in the 2025 class.
What rankings are those?
Those 24/7, at least according to their.
So
site.
top 50-ish player.
Yeah, top 50-ish.
That's
player.
a big deal.
Yeah, so that is a really big deal. So here's the direct quote that he gave 24/7. I don't think I will go there. I made that up in my mind a while ago. I want to get away from home. I talked to my parents and brothers about it, and I think that's the best thing for me. And as soon as coaches were allowed to start contacting him, Notre Dame and Ohio State came right out of the chute. Micah Shrewsbury, he's was at Penn State, now he's at Notre Dame. So
obviously the connections to that university with the family,
right? Margaret, played well for them and Fran, of course, coached there. So, I mean, I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist or whatever to take, not only one step, but two, and say, okay, Jack is going to be a junior this year. What does this mean for West? But what does this mean for Fran going forward? I mean, he's been the coach at Iowa since 2010. When Jack plays, is he gonna retire? Is he is he looking for another job? Is he, just gonna follow Jack around? I mean, because
This is probably Patrick's last year.
yeah, I mean, he's year 5, right? So,
Does he have a COVID year? Could he come back again? Maybe. I don't know. I'm so confused by the COVID rules.
I think his COVID year was his redshirt year.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, I suppose he could, but
he'd probably get it if he petitioned and wanted to come back for
Yeah.
another year. I would think the NCAA, with what he's gone through from a health standpoint, would probably
yeah,
clear him for another season if that's what he wanted to do. But I think he is probably going to take his shot professionally after this season, wherever that is.
yeah, exactly. So, so based on that quote, I mean, it's striking for multiple reasons. One, that Jack isn't going to go to Iowa. I mean, a top 50 kid, at least prospect, isn't going to go to Iowa. And he's, lived here basically his whole life. That says a lot. And then 2, the head coach of Iowa, who's approaching the all-time wins record. Is he not going to watch his son?
What, year 13?
Year 14.
14. Okay.
Yeah. So he's been here a long time. I mean, any of us old dudes who start talking about back when, well, he replaced Licklider and stuff, that's ancient history now. It's all about the present. And so, that is he's what, 63 and
He was born on May 23rd, 1959.
So he's 64. Yeah. So, is he going to continue to coach? Does he want to leave? Does he want to just, once Jack goes to whatever school he's going to go to and then retire? I mean, or is he going to coach and try to watch his highlights? There's a lot of speculation, and all of it is deserved.
And that also leads us to the new athletic director hire.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Could be making 2 gigantic hires pretty early on in tenure.
Exactly.
After, years,
Yeah.
decades of not having to do this, now the next person is going to have to, in this day and age, new media rights deals and how important it is, those 2 sports especially. This is big deal.
Yeah, and it really it's worth a wholesale examination of both programs. Of course, football has to be good. If you suck at football, you suck at life. I mean, you suck at athletic department life anyway. But
yes,
but basketball is also. It's been interesting, Rob, since you've been here for sure in the state, because from the Dr. Tom era, and if anybody's saying that I wasn't for him leaving, you're lying. In '98, it was palpable. And can you imagine if we had Twitter and the message boards then? I mean, it would have been off the chart. After they didn't get especially Rafe LaFrance, but then Collison and Heinrich and all those guys, and and then when he, was a lame duck and he's just like, all right, I can just coach football or coach basketball, and did well there. But, that was a nice team, but that was, they were 5 seed that got to the Sweet 16,
Congrats to Ryan Bowen, by the way.
Absolutely. Tremendous player. But then since then, Iowa hasn't gotten it right, really. I mean, hasn't hit the sweet spot, let's say. They've been competitive on the court at times. In Fran's era, they've been pretty competitive. Haven't had any kind of postseason success to speak of. But then there's been a disconnect in a lot of cases with the head coach and the fan base, whether it's Alford for sure, Licklider definitely, and then of course didn't win worth a shit. And then you have Fran, which has been kind of up and down that way. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So I don't know. There's part of me that thinks that, well, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It's run its course. Maybe it's time for a change. And then there's other, then you always have that because of the Tom Davis situation.
Right.
I'm less that way with basketball though than I am with football, because football, once you're in the deep end and you drown 1 year, it kills you. It just absolutely murders you. Basketball, one good portal year and you can be right back to where you want to be. So I don't know.
Hey, you're looking at 2. Lisa Bluter is 62.
Yeah.
So that's going to have to change at some point here. We're talking about the new athletic director. How old's Rick Heller?
He's in the same boat.
Rick Heller is.
He's got to be, 60-ish.
He was born in. Why am I not seeing what year he was born in? Let's see. Bring up the. Anyway, he's getting along in years as well. We'll say nicely.
He's in the old dude party like we are.
Yeah. So yeah, this next hire athletic director wise is really big.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't hire the right person there. And I mean, and Iowa's had great success over the last, 50 plus years. And I mean, Gary Barta, we talked about it before. I mean, it is a polarizing discussion, but at minimum, at least on the floor, that there have been successful hires and they've been competitive programs, except for Licklider, but he reversed course quickly and changed and got that change. So if it's Beth Getz, and that's my expectation that it will be, then you could be looking at a new football coach, men's basketball coach, maybe even women's basketball coach in the next 5 years. That's massive for a program with the kind of stability that Iowa's enjoyed. And, and what Tom Brands is in his mid 50s, I think.
Yeah.
Mid to low 50s. I don't know. So, who knows? I mean, Dan Gable was pretty damn young when he retired. When it looks at that, I mean, he would have been in his early 50s or late 40s. So, yeah, it's massive when it happens.
Tom Brands, April 9th, 1968. He's 55. He's a year younger than me.
Okay.
And he's a lot better shape. Which isn't saying much.
Yeah, well, I'll be 50 in a couple months, and I'm not in good shape either.
Yeah, it's coming. The big 5-0. We'll have a birthday celebration on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast.
Yeah. Well, we had it at let's see, from midnight to 4:30 in the morning against Nevada last year. So.
All right, folks. We leave anything out, Scott? Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is that most of the schedules are done for.
Okay, that's right. You talked about that
basketball and
schedules.
I filed FOIAs to get the contracts and just to see kind of where things sit. And for the men's, there are 10 contracts that are in and one that hasn't been released yet, or one that has been, I don't know, finalized or released. I think it's one of
We're talking about non-conference, right?
Non-conference.
They usually play 11 non-conference. Is that right?
Yeah, because you get 20 conference games,
right.
11 non-cons and counting whatever. And then like for the men, this is a schedule that is not going to energize anybody at home at all. It's bad. Open up with North Dakota, play Alabama State at home. They go to Creighton for the Gavitt games. Then it's Arkansas State at home. Then they're in the San Diego Invitational against USC, Oklahoma, or Seton Hall. You get 2 of them. Then home against North Florida, at Iowa State, versus Florida A&M in Des Moines. And then the other contract available is Northern Illinois at home. And then the one that is on a list but I don't know if it's been finalized or what, but Baltimore County, UMBC, and that's like December 20th, according to one thing. So when you're talking about that schedule, that is the most underwhelming home schedule I've ever seen for Iowa men's basketball, because there's no ACC Big Ten Challenge. There's no Iowa State. There's no Gavitt games at home. They have the opportunity to now schedule freely, and instead decided to take the.
It reminds me a little bit of 2 years ago when they had they opened with an exhibition against Slippery Rock. Then they played Longwood, Kansas City, North Carolina Central, Alabama State, Western Michigan, Portland State, at Virginia for Big Ten ACC, which is no more.
Yeah.
Then they had Iowa State, obviously.
Yeah.
In Ames, and then Utah State and Sioux Falls, and then home against Southeastern Louisiana and Western Illinois. That was 2 years ago. And this one is similar in terms of draw for home games.
Well, and obviously we can go on, and we don't need to today, but about the about all the Carver, does Carver need this? Because, wrap the students around. When you bring games like this to your arena, you're not doing your fans any service or yourselves. And when and then when you have players lash out sometimes, like, hey, the fans need to show up, I don't know why you want to, it's just, there's nothing on here. If it's Arkansas instead of Arkansas State, maybe. If it's Alabama instead of Alabama State, maybe. Florida instead of Florida A&M.
Especially when you're charging basically full price for these games.
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. And then the women have a little bit different realm. They've got, I think, 6 contracts finalized, and then there's others. They have 13, I think.
Non-cons?
Is it 13 or a little less? Yeah. Because they had that last week. Maybe it is only 11, but Farley Dickinson's who they open with.
Fairly ridiculous.
Yeah, fairly ridiculous. then they're playing Virginia Tech in Charlotte, which, is a big matchup, and they get $150K for that one, plus $50,000 to travel. They go to UNI on November 12th. Kansas State returns and comes to Iowa after playing there last year. They get Bowling Green. They get Cleveland State in Des Moines, and both teams get $125K for the move into Des Moines. And then you also have, on deck that hasn't been released yet, Iowa State, Drake, and then whatever exempt tournament, and the teams they play in the exempt tournament, however that shakes out.
Hopefully that's a good one.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So, again, underwhelming.
Is this later? Are we getting these schedules later than normal for basketball, the non-conference, or is this on time for
this is about
comparatively?
Right. Yeah, this is about right. Okay. So, yeah. With the men, I was thinking now that the challenge is gone, maybe they would just go and set up a home and home with somebody, play it opposite Iowa State, go play Missouri, Kansas State, Kansas, whatever, Arkansas, somebody that's just got a little value. Yeah. I mean,
they got Creighton.
Yeah.
But that's part of the Big East.
Yeah. That's part of that challenge. I mean, you can play just about anybody. Just give your fans something.
Yeah.
Instead it's nothing. Instead it's just, and the only
this isn't the idea, or this isn't what I expected when the Big Four Classic went away.
Yeah. Or
the original home and home with UNI and Drake went away.
Exactly. I mean, when you start to look at this, and Fran's like, well, now we can play games like the Cincinnati game in Chicago.
Yeah.
But again, this is where basketball fails, and fails miserably in my eyes. Those neutral site games, that's crap. I mean, if you can have a one-off in Madison Square Garden against Duke, fine. But when you're already playing an exempt tournament, and then, over the holidays, and then, why are you doing this? Your fans are the ones that support you. Don't you want to, and really there's been a cutback and curtailing of this program in a public perspective for a long time. I mean, right now we would have been yesterday for the opening round of the PTL in North Liberty, or something like that. And that's an opportunity for fans to watch these players up close, get to meet them, for us to do stories on them. It keeps them in the news cycle, keeps them interested, people talking about them, seeing them up close. Now there's none of that. No shirts and skins before football games. You're not playing anybody of value at home. You're just not. I don't care how good North Florida might be. I don't give a shit. Neither does anybody else. So when you're looking at this, you're going, what? Their saving grace is they're going to probably have at least one Big Ten game sometime in early December. But what happens if that's like the day of the championship game for football, and Iowa might happen to be in it, and they're playing Wisconsin at home for that, and then they're playing Michigan or Ohio State in Indianapolis? Nobody's going to care except the people who are, already here. So I don't see, I don't see the value what they're trying to sell with this program. It's not working, and it's going to, when you got a surge in the women's program with season tickets going out off the roof, and then you got the men's program where it's just flatlining. I don't think this is the right strategy. And you don't have an athletic director anymore who's going to be invested about anything beyond August 1st. So I think this could be a problem.
We've got interesting times, no doubt about it. Could be a big time of transition here in the next couple of years for Iowa athletics, from an athletic director standpoint, then from a coaching standpoint, and scheduling standpoint. Because usually when you have changes in the coaches, there's often philosophy changes in schedule. They go hand in hand.
Right. And I think, there is merit to saying that the Big Ten is very difficult, and 20 games in the Big Ten that's something that you got to be prepared for. And then you have an exempt tournament, you have Iowa State, and, that encompasses 23 out of your games. But you also have
game at Creighton too.
Yeah. And Creighton. Okay. 24 games. So, you're in the Gavitt games this year, but 7 other games. Do you need that many to be layups?
The Big Ten should hook up with another conference now that they're out of the ACC thing. Maybe Big 12. I guess the Pac-12 is whatever now. You're getting 2 of the better programs coming to your conference basketball-wise. So I don't know if that works.
I think the Big 12 would be fun to do it with, but because they really can't do the ACC again because it's an ESPN product, and then the Pac-12. I don't know if there's a lot of trust there right now.
Yeah. And then the SEC's. Yeah, that's ESPN's baby.
Yeah, well, SEC and ACC challenge now.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they can do that, and they can play games on SEC network and all that. So it really just comes down to, what are they going to do with
some good? I mean, with Cincinnati coming in.
Yeah.
Is it Houston?
Houston.
Those are good basketball programs.
Oh yeah, BYU's a nice one. You might be having Colorado come in.
Mm-hmm.
You might be having Arizona eventually come in. You never know. You have Kansas. You have Kansas State. You have Iowa State, which I would hope Iowa doesn't say, let's just give us Iowa State and call that good. That would be absolutely ridiculous. But Oklahoma State's generally a pretty good program, and Texas Tech, TCU, so yeah, you can get to see a lot of these pretty decent programs. That would be a fun one. West Virginia would not be, just although after what happened this weekend, it'd be interesting to see what happens there.
Poor Huggy. What a way to go down, man. He needs to get help.
He had his opportunity a couple months ago where he just about bit the bullet from a lot of stupid things he had to say, and then he backed it up with blowing a 2-1, in Pittsburgh.
He's certainly had enough chances.
Yeah. So he resigned / retired. I'm sure it was you resigned today or you're fired today.
Yeah. You don't have to go home, but you cannot stay here.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what they do if they just hire somebody as a stopgap, they elevate somebody to an interim level, or if they hire.
I saw a story where the AD didn't want to hire an interim coach, but he or she may not have a chance. May not have a choice, I should say, at this stage of the game. This is pretty late in the process to hire a new basketball coach.
Yeah, it is for sure. But I'm sure there's a lot of good mid-major coaches who'd say, "Sure, I'll take West Virginia."
And the money that comes with it.
Yeah, give me a year to make it a mulligan year, as PJ Fleck said, year 0.
Yeah. All right, Scott. Do we get through everything?
I think so. I think we're
Okay.
in good shape.
We caught up after the week off, and we'll be back on Thursday with a lot more to talk about. The big recruiting weekend for the 24 class, mostly this weekend coming up, official visits. And we'll have player availability on Wednesday. Chris Murray, NBA draft coming up. A lot to talk about on Thursday, so come back and join us then at 9 a.m. We'll be live on the YouTube, and then we'll have the podcast posted for you guys shortly after that. Thank you, everybody, for listening today and putting up with our wonky schedules this summer. Thank you to our sponsors. We certainly appreciate their support, and we will talk to you folks in a few days. Be good until then.